We finally got a new episode of the Orville that is New Dimensions. I just finished watching it and I think this may be one of my favorite episodes so far. I don't know if I liked it more or less than Firestorm. It's hard for me to tell because they're all so good, but all I can say is the Orville has come so far since the pilot. Everything is better. They've really hit their stride. They've got tone management a lot more consistent. Their jokes are just consistently landing and placed in just the right spots to feel like this is just Star Trek with a loosened tie. And I absolutely am loving this show. And it's so funny, the characters like Bortus and Isaac that were the most obvious ripoffs from Star Trek characters and specifically TNG characters like Worf and Data, I did not think that I would love these characters, but I do. And oh my god, Isaac was on fire this episode. There were so many good Isaac lines, I probably won't even remember to mention them all. But the basic plot of this episode is that the Orville encounters an anomaly, and while they are investigating the anomaly, another ship comes and encounters the anomaly and the pilot is killed, and then they find out that aboard the ship there are, I think, 20 cases of krill rifles. And so then the krill come to investigate and the Orville is forced to go inside the anomaly to hide. When they enter the anomaly, they find that it is a dimension of two-dimensional space, and there is just some amazing visuals and really gorgeous shots there, and also some really interesting like sci-fi concepts that they play around with that are really fun. But I'm gonna go through this episode and just talk about all of the things that I liked about it and all of the, well, I was gonna say all the things I didn't like, but I don't know if there were enough things I didn't like to make a list of all of the things. So we're just gonna talk about it. The episode starts out with a party for Newton, who is the chief of engineering, and he is going to be leaving to go design a starship, as long as he can have some pop on the job. It was really cute. And then we see Malloy, Lamar, and Lieutenant Dan talking. I love Lieutenant Dan. He's so sweet and silly and just, he seems like a good-natured kind of dude. At one point he's like, you guys should get to know me better. I'm really funny. And he's talking about how he wishes that he had the guts to pull off pranks the way Lamar and Malloy do. And I just found that really, really charming. And then they put a piece of Yaphet in the buffet. Bortus eats the piece of Yaphet, and then they go to see Claire, and Yaphet informs Bortus that he's going to have to go get the piece out, and Bortus says, I will not allow you inside me. But then he eventually relents and says, do what you must. And Yaphet reaches out and slithers on down his throat and like goes and gets his little bit of Yaphet, and it's very uncomfortable. Then we see that Kelly is reprimanding Malloy and Lamar, and she finds out that Lamar is smart. Apparently he scored extremely well on an aptitude test at Union Point, and she realizes that he might not be recognizing his own potential and decides that she's going to go to bat for him. Then we have the ship just coasting along, and they hit the anomaly, and Malloy says, maybe we hit a squirrel, and Isaac says, there is no evidence of Squirridae rodentia or any other mid-sized rodent. But I love how Isaac just takes things literally. The way they do that always comes off just right. And then we get a scene with Isaac and Lamar going to investigate some more and do some readings all over the ship. And we get a reunion with Isaac and Claire's kids, so we kind of get to see that they've had a bit of an ongoing relationship, which I think is a great little bit to add and continues to add more dimension to Isaac's character. They ask if they can help though, and Isaac says, no, you are small and feeble and do not possess the necessary intelligence. So then they go to investigate some unoccupied quarters. There is a dead plant in the quarters, and Yaphet is displeased that Lamar has been put on the investigation because, you know, Lamar put a piece of him in the buffet and then Bortus ate it, and he was not pleased about that. And we get some good conflict between them, but what I like is that this episode does a good job of building up to the anomaly and putting in little seeds for the effects that they explain later. And they do this in a very Star Trek fashion where I think I audibly said, ooh, weird things are happening when I saw the dead plants. And something about the way that that they put this episode together just really feels like a great episode of Next Gen or Voyager to me, and I loved this episode. I really did. Oh, another favorite bit that I forgot to talk about is when they are on the bridge, Malloy suggests that he should get a cat, maybe a bridge cat. Bortus asks what a cat is, and when Malloy explains and talks about how you pet cats, Isaac comes over and we start seeing, we just hear like the fabric swooshing, and then it zooms in and we see that Isaac is petting Malloy, and then he turns to him and goes, "Are we bonding?" And that was another one of my favorite Isaac moments. There are just so many in this episode. Then we get Kelly letting Ed know that Lamar is actually smart and should be considered for chief engineer. They talk about a crewman whose name Ed does not know, and I've had this happen where someone says, "Oh, hey, Ren," and you're just like, "Hey, you." Ed handles it a little better. He goes, "Hey, there he is." And Kelly actually lets it slip that she helped Ed get his command. We see a major loss of confidence for Ed and him feeling like he has to prove to himself that he deserves his position, and we see him really trying to work through it. Later on, we see that Lamar has been put in charge of the investigation, and he tries to do an icebreaker type thing, and we get this cute moment with Lieutenant Dan where he talks about how he likes restoring antique furniture and brunch. And I love Lieutenant Dan. I really want to see more of Lieutenant Dan. Although I feel bad for the actor who plays Lieutenant Dan, because that must be hours in the makeup chair. I'd imagine the mask is made of either silicone or liquid latex that has been, shaped around his head. That has to be so hot. I've worn some basic latex prosthetics that I've made for like zombies and things like that, and I always get like way too warm underneath it. I can't imagine having just your whole face and head just encased in something like that. That's gotta be rough. So another alien ship starts heading towards the anomaly, and they try to tell them not to crash into the anomaly, and the alien basically says, "Fuck you, don't tell me what to do," and then immediately dies by crashing into the anomaly. And they go aboard, and of course they find 20 cases of krill rifles, and they realize the krill will probably be back for them. And then they detect the krill on sensors, and then the krill actually pick up speeds that it'll only take them 14 minutes to intercept. So the Orville has no other choice but to enter the anomaly. And here it gets really cool. We see some very interesting visuals, and we see this very Star Trek moment where Mercer talks about the book Flatland and how their society was arranged with different shapes and things like that, and different sides having different social standings. And he kind of asks, I wonder what that world out there is like, because they entertain the idea that there's actually a two-dimensional civilization that they're looking at as they're flying through two-dimensional space. So they basically create a bubble that gives them three-dimensional protection inside two-dimensional space, because going into two-dimensional space is what killed the pilot of the other ship, because I guess it flattens you, and so it takes away the shapes of all the molecules and proteins that allow your body to do body things. And so we get a moment where their protection is disrupted, and they're all nosebleeding and having some pain. Bortus thinks that it was very unpleasant, and they realize that they no longer have engines, and they're going to have to tow the ship out. So Lamar and Mercer go aboard a shuttle that they modify so that it's bigger on the inside, and they make a Doctor Who reference, and I love how this show likes to make pop culture references but always gets them just a little bit wrong. So he's like, ah yes, like Doctor Who's phone booth. And so they get in their adorable little shuttle where it's flat on the outside and three-dimensional on the inside, and they start towing the ship, and then they realize the aperture is closing, so they have to jump to warp, and it's such a risk, but they do it. Oh, I'm sorry, they have to go to quantum drive. It's warp. Let's be real, it's warp drive. And they escape the anomaly, and all is well, and Lieutenant Lamar is promoted to chief engineer, and this episode was just a blast. I enjoyed every single minute of this episode. The questions I had about things in this episode were always interesting questions that Star Trek typically makes me ask. and I just enjoyed so many different aspects of this episode. I thought the comedy was perfect, I thought the tone was great, the drama was good, and the real internal struggle. At first, I didn't like the Mercer and Kelly issue. Again, I'm kind of tired of seeing their interpersonal crap over and over and over every other episode, you know? But in this case, I thought that it was good to resolve some of the remaining loose ends from the pilot, and they did a good job of handling this with a little bit of nuance. You know, at first Ed was kind of petty about it and a little bit shitty, and then she called him out, and then he explained that even though he understands she came from a good place, it does still undermine his confidence. And I thought that was the best way you could have handled that while still making me like both of the characters involved. Because at first I didn't really see where Ed was coming from, but then I did. And I thought that that was really well put together and just shows this show really does know how to write its characters, how to do drama, and also how to infuse it with just enough comedy. If you have not been watching The Orville, what are you doing with your life? Go watch The Orville, it's on Hulu. But that is everything that I have for you for now. Let me know what you thought about this episode in the comments down below. If you like my channel, subscribe. If you don't like my channel, I'm sure you'll tell me. That's everything I have for you on this though. Wiedersehen.